All right. I think we are at critical capacity for folks. So let's go ahead and get started. So welcome, everybody. We're very excited to have you all at this webinar, kind of a CMMC masterclass series here. What we're looking to talk about today, key strategic decisions to achieve and maintain CMMC compliance. Obviously a very hot topic right now. So we're looking to dive into that. I will mostly be hosting it. And then our friends from Abacode, who I'll introduce here in a second, will be talking a lot about some of these strategic decisions that you need to make throughout the process towards compliance. And then at the end, I'll be touching a little bit more on the C through PAO end, some when and how to advise on engaging a C through PAO, what factors to consider. But we also want to leave some time at the end for Q&A. So if you guys have any questions now throughout the entire time, please feel free to throw those in the chat. There's a Q&A section specifically as well. If we don't have enough time to answer them or answer all of them, I do want to make a note that we will make sure to follow up as well. We will make sure to follow up via email and answer any and all questions that may come up today. So without further ado, let's get started. So I will go counter here. So I'll introduce myself first. So Matt Bruggeman, I'm a federal lead here at A-LIGN. A-LIGN is a C3 PAO. So really I help work with a lot of our clients on really mapping out their journey and talking a lot about what we're talking about here today, like what all is involved in this compliance journey, what do I need to consider, and what are my options. But we have our friends from Abacode, because we are a C3 PAO, we really stay on the assessment side. Abacode kind of specializes on more of the upfront work. So we've got Rolando Torres, who's the Chief Security Operations Officer at Abacode, joining us, as well as Jeannie Alfred, the Senior Data Loss Prevention and Compliance Consultant from Abacode. So I will go ahead and kick things over to their team, and we're going to start off with just a quick overview, high-level introduction into CMMC.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and once again, thank you, and welcome to today's webinar on CMMC and the key strategic decisions for compliance with this specific framework. Once again, thank you, Matt, for the kind introduction, and I'm very excited to be here today as we explore this critical framework that's designed to enhance cybersecurity across the defense industrial base. So, as many of you know, cybersecurity threats continue to evolve, and protecting sensitive government data is more important than ever today. So whether you're a prime contractor or a small to medium-sized business supporting those DoD contracts, understanding and then implementing CMMC is going to be essential to maintaining compliance and then securing overall our national defense supply chain. So today we're going to break down the fundamentals of CMMC and then discuss the impact on your organization and then provide you with practical steps to prepare for certification. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so let's just take a step back and then consider why CMMC is so important. So the DoD has made it very clear that cybersecurity is a national security priority. We have adversaries that are continuously targeting the defense industrial base. So it's no longer enough to assume that the basic security measures that we've been continuously using to protect controlled unclassified information and federal contract information are working. So CMMC is designed to ensure that all contractors and subcontractors follow the standardized cybersecurity best practices before handling sensitive data. Excuse me. So compliance is no longer optional. It's a prerequisite before doing business with the DoD. So again, whether you're a small business or a large defense contractor, understanding your CMMC obligations are going to be key to maintaining contracts and staying competitive in the industry. So with this overall foundation that we have in place, I'm just going to pass it back to Matt to start the discussion on the core principles of CMMC compliance.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeannie. So this is kind of an overview as to kind of the main topics that we're going to be touching on here today. So again, we've denoted these as some of the key strategic decisions that you'll need to make along the way towards compliance. Now that Jeannie gave an overview on what CMMC is, why it's so important, and when you might need to get it pre-award. Let's talk through what are those strategic decisions that you'll need along the way. So some of those, just to highlight them here. So contractual requirements, in terms of, what contractual requirements will I have? When will I have them? All that fun stuff. The CMMC environment scoping, very critical. Have to understand the scope. Where is the scope for CMMC? And this next one kind of speaks to that. Where does my CUI, my controlled and classified information data, actually flow? And how does that inform my scope? Also touching on some of the key important pieces of documentation that you guys will need to make sure that you are preparing for along the way. The system security plan, the SSP, and all the policies and procedure documentation that will feed into your compliance and your ability to prove compliance in order to get especially a level 2 certification, if that is what you end up needing. So I'm going to hand it back over to the Abaco team to talk through some of these topics in more detail.
Thanks, Matt. Welcome back, everybody. So now that we've covered the fundamentals of what we are going over today, let's shift our focus back to one of the most critical aspects to this framework. And that is going to be your contractual requirements and why compliance is just non-negotiable for organizations working with the DoD. So we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So again, CMMC compliance is not optional, right? So it's a mandatory requirement for any organization looking to do business with the DoD. So contracts are going to now include specific CMMC certification levels, meaning that if you don't meet these necessary requirements, you won't be able to, or eligible, to bid or renew your existing contracts. So this applies not only to just prime contractors, but to their subcontractors as well. So you have your flow down requirements, and that ensures that every level on the supply chain handling FCI or CUI makes cybersecurity and cybersecurity hygiene a shared responsibility. So this means that compliance isn't just an overall business risk, it also comes with serious legal and financial consequences. So we have something called the False Claims Act, or FCA, and that holds contractors accountable for falsely claiming compliance. This can lead to potential fines, lawsuits, and even debarment from being able to work with the defense industrial base. So again, failing to meet CMMC requirements could eventually lead into contract termination, obviously reputational damage, and the loss of future opportunities to work with the DoD. So these DoD contract reviews will scrutinize compliance, making it critical for your organizations to integrate cybersecurity into their operations and be more proactive. And then beyond targeting your contractual obligations, the true purpose of CMMC is to protect sensitive defense information and strengthen national security. So all of us are most likely going to be working with the DIB or already in the DIB, and that is going to be remaining a high value target for nation state actors and cyber criminals. So single vulnerabilities that we're finding in our supply chain have far reaching consequences. So CMMC has established this standardized approach to cybersecurity, ensuring that every contractor, regardless of the size, follows the best practices to reduce risk and improve resilience for their organization. So ultimately, compliance here isn't just going to be about checking the box. So it's going to be more about securing your organization, protecting your sensitive data, and maintaining your ability to support the DoD. We want to take proactive steps towards CMMC readiness, not just as a requirement, but as a competitive advantage and increasing security consciousness for the defense landscape. And here we've got key points. So in order to achieve this for your contractual requirements, first thing you want to do is at least review them, define your obligations for handling CUI that should be listed within your DD 254 or your procurements, and then understand your flow down requirements as well. With that being said, I'm going to pass it to our Chief Security Officer, Rolando.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be talking to you here. And thanks, Matt and Jenny. So we're going to talk about a CMMC environment scoping specifically, which it's an area where, it's almost like where the CMMC solution happens, right? And I think it is very important to realize In many cases, you're going to be part of this webinar because your organization has made a decision that you are responsible for meeting the CMMC requirements. But it's very important to realize that this is not an IT issue. It is a business issue, right? So it is a enterprise level issue. And as such, it is important that there is buy-in from leadership and that there is constant communication on the decision making along the lines of what are your CUI boundaries and what is a CUI environment. So from that perspective, being a little bit more like a minimalist helps from the standpoint of being able to reduce the effort to comply. But then on the business side, there are specific workflows that you need to take into consideration, right? From, we used to call it on the commercial side, from order to cash or from contract to billing. You have to understand, who are the folks that actually get access to CUI today as part of their business functions and determine how those workflows are going to change. Not only that, communicate to those business owners and make sure that you get sign in or sign off on those, requirement changes. So the key word here is change, right? So anytime you're going to change a workflow, you're going to change the way people do work and they perform their functions in the business, is going to have a major impact, right? Change is not easy. I think that's very common, and it's something that you cannot prescribe in a vacuum. So you're going to need to have a team environment, and it's going to be a team effort to decide, how those workflows will change if they need to change in order to meet the CMMC compliance requirements. Again, like going with a segmentation type of approach where you have a smaller environment that is in scope of CMMC will save you some time and effort in the front end. But of course, you have to be in a position where you can support the business and the business is able to continue to function and you're not disrupting the business from that perspective. I think it goes back to what Jeannie mentioned before, in terms of why are we doing this, and so why CMMC compliance is so important. Like we want to protect the CUI. So if we set up an environment and the boundary to protect CUI, we need to religiously follow those controls that we put in place to keep the CUI in that environment, and that has to be highly guarded and protected. Every time you assess the workflows, you're going to realize that your boundary continues to expand. And keep control over that boundary and the systems that are in scope is going to be critical. You have to define what are your CUI assets, the one that actually are going to be holding the DoD or government issue CUI. And those have to comply with the requirements, right, that are set in the CMMC NIST 100-171 standard. And then what are the solutions and systems that complement the CUI asset, right? I mean, and there's a list of those. Are you going to need a SIEM solution to aggregate security event? Yes. Are you going to need EDR to monitor endpoints? Yes. Are your mobile devices in scope to a certain extent in the CUI boundary? Yes, if you're using MFA that requires your mobile device. And the list goes on and on. The more you expand your environment, the more systems will come in scope. Do you have a need to print CUI for some of the workflows that we mentioned at the beginning? If you do, well, the network in which those printers reside will be in scope, as well as the printers themselves. So yes, it will be a lot easier to limit the scope to cloud systems, and in some cases that also is possible, but you have to understand where the CUI resides. And I think at the business level, there has to be a commitment to meeting the standard going forward. CMMC is not a point in time effort; it's a continuous effort, and there's a lot of processes that will continue to operate throughout the period, even after there is a audit and certification. Like just going through the points here real quick. The remote work environments, if there's a need for that, will also become part of the scope. So we have to be able to elaborate, where exactly CUI is being accessed from, what are the devices that are involved in accessing CUI, in addition to where the CUI is hosted. If you're receiving CUI from government agencies through email, then your email system is in scope, unless you're able to change that practice from the DoD or the Prime that is sending you that documentation. So the DoD is not prescribing what you need to define in your boundary and your system, but it's prescribing what are the controls that need to govern that environment. So there's a lot of decision making that needs to happen, and I think this is where the typical subprime DIB company serving under a prime contract, or even if you have a prime contract but it's not of your size, I mean, you're probably gonna need some help from a consultant firm, like Abacus, that will be able to help you with, assessing some of these areas of concern and being able to define that CUI environment where it's not only compliant, but it's also aligned with your business goals. Right, Jeannie, back to you.
Sure. Thank you, Rolando. So we can just go to the next slide. Here we're going to talk about CUI data flow, and it kind of really touches on a lot of the things that Rolando was just talking about. And this is scoping your environment, and you want to start on strategic mapping of controlled and classified information. This is going to be essential for achieving and maintaining CMMC compliance. So OSCs, or organizations seeking certification, need to start by first identifying where their CUI resides within their systems and how it flows across their network, and then the persons and systems who have access to that CUI. Without having an effective understanding of this, it's nearly impossible to apply the right security controls effectively. So it goes back to what Rolando was saying. This is going to affect your business operations, because if you don't effectively identify where CUI is flowing across your organization, this becomes an enterprise-wide certification, and all of the security controls within NIST 800-171 Rev 2 will need to be applied across the entire enterprise. So mapping CUI ensures organizations can segment and protect this sensitive information, reducing the risk of unauthorized access or data breaches. So the proper mapping also streamlines the compliance efforts by aligning your security investments without actually adding risk exposure as well. So rather than applying a blanket security measures, organizations can then focus resources on just protecting their most critical assets. This targeted approach improves the efficiency and ensures compliance with the CMMC requirements without adding unnecessary complexities. So in addition, it also helps organizations demonstrate their due diligence during their audits and assessments. It also reduces the likelihood of compliance failures and penalties, because in this way, it's proving to the assessor that you understand where your CUI resides, and you also have proper access control restrictions in place to protect that very sensitive data. And then back to the contractual requirements, when we were talking about them earlier, from a contractual and operational standpoint, strategic CUI mapping also supports your business continuity and risk management processes. So by understanding where and how CUI is stored, transmitted, and processed, organizations can then build stronger incident response plans as well, and ensure rapid containment in the event of breach, meeting DFAR 7012 regulations as well. This also helps strengthen relationships with prime contractors, which will always ask for this requirement, as well as documented CUI strategies and demonstrating a commitment to your overall approach to cybersecurity and compliance. So again, ultimately, CUI mapping is just more than a compliance exercise, right? So again, back to what Rolando was saying earlier, it's not a one and done approach. It's a continuous program. It's proactive security. It's measures that protect sensitive defense information. It's going to enhance your operational resilience and enhance your eligibility for your ability to work with the DoD and bid on DoD contracts as well. So organizations that continue to take their strategic approaches to CUI management by using a CUI data flow management program will be better positioned overall to navigate the evolving CMMC process while maintaining a strong competitive edge in the defense industrial base overall. So for the key points for this, we have, again, you want to identify CUI, where it flows throughout your organization. So again, where you process, store, or transmit it. Do you have any access from third-party cloud services, any authorized external connections to your controlled unclassified information? And then you want to document that in a data flow diagram for your compliance program, and then for your assessors and your audit as well. That being said, pass it back to you, Rolando.
Rolando, if you're there, I believe you might be muted.
Oh, yes. Sorry about that. So yeah, I think, I mean, like I was just starting to mention that as we, we talk about the CUI boundary, right, as part of a documentation component of your security plan. You basically identify what are the systems that are in scope of the CMMC environment. And then we also talk about the the CUI data flow, which is also part of the documentation that goes into the system security plan. So it is very important that these two fundamental aspects of the security plan are accurate, purposely built to reflect the reality of the field, and that we take into consideration each and every scenarios. As I mentioned before, like if you print CUI documents, I mean, like you should not ignore the fact that you are printing those documents, right? That's something that should be in scope of your CUI boundary, and it should be included in your CUI data flow. If you have concerns that because of that you won't be able to be CMMC compliant, then perhaps you should have a conversation about stopping that practice, right? Same thing with for example, USB devices. If there is a workflow in which CUI gets copied to a USB drive or USB device and then loaded over to another system, that has to be documented in the data flow as well. So we cannot assume that that yes, I can do that. My CUI it's secure within the CUI environment in the boundary, but I have some exceptions in where I can extract CUI and use it in other places. So that's that would be a almost like an illegal practice at that point. So it's very important to recognize that because it's very easy to work on a by exception type of environment when you define your CUI data flow and your CUI environment and boundary. But we definitely want to be very strict and conform with the requirements of CMMC at all times, right? So that's part of the requirement. So I think like if you're here, you probably were assigned the task of becoming for your company to become CMMC compliant, or maybe perhaps you have some additional changes coming to your already compliant program that you're not sure how to tackle. And at the center of the compliance package is your system security plan. It's a document that it basically goes through each and every one of the control families and documents what is the what are the security controls that are in place to meet the requirements of each control family controls, right? So it's a very in-depth document. Can you document it using a Word document? Perhaps. It is very lengthy, sometimes in the hundreds of pages. Just managing itself in a Word document with a standard laptop is a difficult task. So in many cases, what makes the most sense is to look at some level of platform, that will allow you to document the different control information and requirements information into a SaaS level type of solution that, like a GRC portal, that allows you to have better management of the data that is going in, the change management of the information that gets documented in the SSP. The SSP has to be well balanced, and and it has to meet the expectations both of the CMMC standard as well as the operational requirements. You don't want to document something in the SSP that cannot be proven in practice once you go into the audit, right? We see those situations where the SSP is like a perfect document that doesn't really match the realities of the field. So it has to be a reflection of the controls that have been put in place to meet the requirements. Another thing that we see, and this is something that some of you might have experienced, is you might start down the path of documenting the SSP. You might start making assumptions of how things are going to be in the future once you get the time to make the configuration changes or make the migrations, change the workflows, and adapt your business to the CMMC requirements. But then along the way, new changes come in, modifications in technologies are adopted, configuration changes are implemented for other reasons, and then you end up with an SSP that doesn't reflect what the real configuration is on the CMMC environment. And the very unfortunate reality of that is you have to rework on the SSP, and reworking on the SSP takes a lot of time, right? So you have to review and re-review, revise, update, peer review, get approval from management, and start all over again. So it is critical, and this is where we took the time to put this almost like in chronological order. It is critical that you have your environment scope done properly and that everyone agrees on that and is set in stone almost before you move down the path of building your SSP. Otherwise, you're going to be reworking the SSP quite a bit. The SSP is indeed a green document to a certain extent. I mean, you want to lock it down right before the audit, and you want to make sure that it reflects everything that is, really being configured and done. The auditors are going to use the SSP as a guideline for some of the audit activity, along with some of the other documentation. But you'll be in trouble very quickly if your SSP is not aligned. If you're, for example, mentioning technologies that you're not using, you're mentioning policies that are not in place, or procedures that are no longer being followed, you'll be in trouble very quickly if that's the case. So the SSP has to be properly reviewed, and it has to match what you have in terms of the environment. For those that are looking to reassess and redo their SSP, it's a lot of work, right? I mean, you end up with a couple of 100 pages document. It has to be very specific. One of the comments that we have heard in the industry is, can I get a sample SSP, right? I mean, well, these are highly confidential documents, and it really is not to be shared with somebody else, and that's by design. So it is highly confidential and part of your security package. So you shouldn't be asking for a copy of a SSP of an SSP template, and they're all going to vary because each solution is different. And the other thing is, specifically to the SSP content, right, is, as I mentioned before, is really going to reflect the environment and the uniqueness of the environment. So it will be very hard to have a template that matches, is even close to what you need to accomplish in terms of the SSP. So like as you move towards documenting your SSP, and you're in a good position to do so, some key points is make sure that you have the proper technology to support you in this journey, because it's a big task to accomplish. It requires a lot of time. I think in estimates of the DoD, which I think they're a little bit conservative, they talk about hundreds of hours spent on SSP and policy and procedures. So you have to be very cognizant that this is going to impact it. This is not your day job. this is going to impact, your day-to-day job dramatically. I think the other option is, like obviously getting help, right? Getting somebody else to work with you on this to help you, draft the SSP and help you through the process of becoming, CMMC compliant. All right, with that in mind, we can move to the next topic here. So the other big components of the documentation kit that is required to be ready and set to go for the audit and certification, as well as if you're doing yourself attestation, is the policies and procedures, right? So the policies set what are the things that the organization is doing, the controls that have been put in place to meet the requirements of the of the CMMC program, but your procedures also are going to be part of the scope of the audit, and they basically define how those policies are being implemented. And it is important, right? Because in policy, you want to make sure that you document as a foundational part of your program, not only in the SSP, but in policy documents, what are the things that you're doing to meet the requirements of each control family. Those policies are binding, so so from that perspective, you shouldn't be like making decisions on your own, unless you have the authority to do so, to implement these policies and deploying these policies at the company-wide level, enterprise level. They should have, they should go through proper review on the legal side as well as on the leadership side of the organization, and being signed off and approved by them, as part of the program. This is going to allow you to, make sure that you're not, setting policies and procedures that are, go against, the business goals and the procedures that are in place. And it also allows you to have more credibility with regards to the CMMC program. Like as we mentioned at the beginning, this is it's a business issue, it's an enterprise issue, it's not an IT issue. As such, it requires, the involvement of the legal team, the leadership team, and everyone has to be in agreement that whatever decision is made in terms of CMMC compliance is the one that the whole company and the enterprise is going to adopt and support. So those are key components, right, on the policies and procedures. When it comes to procedures documentation, there's a rigor in the level of details. I think that the procedures documentation is very unique to how the technicians and the engineers and the folks that actually have the access to the environment from the administrator standpoint perform some of those tasks, right? Especially for technical, controls, and the ability to, showcase that those, controls are in place and are being met through, like taking a screenshot or providing a configuration file, or being able to show an auditor that those configurations are in place and operating. So it is very important that the procedures are aligned with the technology, for sure, and then with the level of configuration that has been, implemented in the environment. And it is important to be audit ready, right? So the procedures should allow for, the organization to present the proper level of evidence that the procedure is operational and that it's being followed, based on the set policy. So, like, for example, if a procedure on the access control policy says that, access control will be reviewed every quarter, so then that procedure should indicate, how are you reviewing those access control logs, or, just the asset control and the users that have access to the systems. How are you, documenting the evidence that you're performing those, procedures, right? Who's responsible for performing those? I mean, what cadence? Is it quarterly? Like, how are you going to be able to do that? So very quickly it becomes highly complex. This is where, GRC tools that, not only allow you to document the SSP and help you with the policies and some of the procedures, but it also allows you with the tasks. Because these procedures, as we said at the beginning, CMMC is not a point in time certification or process. It's an ongoing, process. So some of these tasks are going to help you, aggregate the evidence, being able to go back and, look into what are the controls that need to be revise, how often do you need to review your policies, and make sure that you're not missing the point, or you're not missing the deadlines on, how to, make sure that those controls remain operational according to the policies and the sets controls in the SSV. Then we can move along.
All right. Thank you, Rolando. Okay, so we're going to go over some common misconceptions here. So there's several misconceptions about CMMC that can lead organizations to underestimate the effort that's required for compliance. Rolando mentioned that there's estimates out there by the DoD that it takes about 18 months from start to finish for the full implementation of the compliance program under CMMC. And that's probably a rough estimate there. And one of the biggest myths is that CMMC, again, is a one-time commitment. In reality, compliance is an ongoing process, right? So as cyber threats evolve, so do many of the regulatory requirements. So we have to continuously address it and improve the security posture to maintain the certification. Doing this set it and forget it approach will not meet the DoD expectations, and it's not a fear-mongering tactic. It's just a reminder that if you're working with DoD and you have DD-254s out there as a prime contractor, they will likely send you some cybersecurity assessments outside of your regulatory framework when you meet certification every 3 years. They may send it to you every year or every 6 months to verify your compliance, and then you will have to do a self-attestation annually regardless anyways. So again, it's not a meet the certification and then it's done. It's a continuous compliance program. And another misconception is that CMMC is too complex to implement. While it does sound scary and it does introduce some new requirements, it is designed to align with existing cybersecurity best practices, right? Such as NIST 800-171, which has been in existence since 2017. So organizations can take a phased approach, starting with gap assessments, implementing the necessary controls, and then maintaining the documentation, a lot of the stuff that we covered in our previous slides and discussions. So many organizations may mistakenly believe that they can become compliant when needed, and then they end up waiting until the last minute, and it becomes very, very costly and time-consuming, as Rolando alluded to. So achieving CMMC certification does take time, and then without the proper planning, organizations do risk losing contract opportunities if they are not certified when these requirements are enforced. So again, some assume also that they may have a high SPRS score right now, so it means that they are fully prepared for CMMC. So while a strong SPRS score is a good indicator of a strong security posture as well, it does not overall guarantee compliance, right? So CMMC requires a third-party assessment to validate these security controls. So like Matt said earlier, they're a C3 PAO, they're on the audit and assessment side of things. Abacode, cybersecurity and compliance, is on the consultant side of things and helps you prepare for that third-party assessor to come in and verify your compliance program. So similarly, these small businesses often think that CMMC doesn't apply to them, but compliance is required for any contractor handling CUI, regardless of size. So in fact, small businesses are also frequent targets of cybersecurity attacks. If you remember the Exchange attack back in 2024, I believe, it was actually across mostly small and medium-sized businesses in the defense industrial base. So that's why CMMC is so important. And then finally, there's the false belief that organizations will be certified immediately after their assessment. In reality, certification involves a very thorough review, and if gaps are identified, remediation may be necessary. In the current CMMC 2.0 regulation, you have an authorized 180 days to implement any identified plan of action and milestones, and organizations assume that they may pass on their first attempt without proper preparation. They may face delays and then even end up having some risk to their contracts right now. So overall, the key takeaway is that CMMC is not a checkbox exercise, right? It's a long-term commitment to cybersecurity and regulatory compliance that requires strategic planning, continuous monitoring, and proactive security investments. Back to you, Rolando.
Yep, perfect. So, some common challenges is CMMC applies to everyone, right? That has a contract with the DoD or with the DoD prime. So budget and resource constraints is probably number one. Misconceptions about how much it costs. Some people might say, oh, it's just going to be like a relatively simple thing to do, but the reality is it's complex. It requires time, effort, and expertise, and in many cases, those that expertise is not available in house, right? So that's a big challenge for almost everyone, including large organizations. The other big challenge is, for many years we have been hearing about CMMC compliance, these 100-171, and there's been a sense that we have some good cybersecurity hygiene, and I think we meet the controls. When I say I think is like we have a tendency to be very positive about feeling positive about meeting them, and then we say it's an SPR score of 110. But then once you start getting engaged in a company like A-LIGN and the gap assessment is done, that SPR score goes down very quickly, because in reality there's a lack of rigor around the controls that were set or thought to be in place. So so there's a requirement to adapt quickly to that reality, right? Which is like we thought we were compliant, but we're not. So what do we do now? Then in addition to that is there was a lot of assumptions of what the final rule would be or would not be, and then the final rule just got approved, and there's a lot of additional requirements or things that were thought that maybe perhaps that would not become requirements that are requirements now. Like for example, like the requirement of if you have CUI in the cloud, it has to be a FedRAMP approved, a FedRAMP system, one that is in the marketplace, a FedRAMP moderate approved system, right? So in the past, maybe there was assumptions that it could have been less than that, but that's the reality of the field right now. So so there's a rush to almost like to make sure that those requirements are met if you're using a cloud strategy to that. And then managing the subcontractor flow down, right? I mean, so everyone wants to make sure that the subcontractors that they're using also meet the requirements, and that's a big challenge, right? I think as the contract obligations flow down, you run into smaller and smaller vendors, and for them it's a little bit harder to meet those requirements. Again, like you're in this webinar perhaps trying to figure this out, but you also have another job, right? I mean, and it's probably a very demanding one, and this is almost like a full-time job in itself, to become CMMC compliant. So you say, there's a lot of constraints and resources to be able to meet the demands of the CMMC compliant effort, especially the initial push, and then keep the CMMC compliance, going, throughout the years. So how a cybersecurity and compliance service provider like A-LIGN can help, right? So the first one is providing the proper guidance, and I think we have seen in the past, investment being made by mistake. We have seen assumptions being made by mistake, and then the reality of the CMMC program really settling in, where some of those mistakes could probably be avoided with the proper level of guidance. As I mentioned before, the DoD doesn't tell you how do you have to be compliant. You are free to select the systems and the components that are part of your environment, but they do prescribe very strictly what are the controls that need to be implemented for those systems. So so it is important to have that guidance and have proper planning ahead of any investment, and I think that's where a consultant firm will come in and help you with that initial gap assessment, looking at what are your CUI, where the CUI is, where does it reside, and then how could the initial setup of the program will could be accomplished. the gap assessment is critical, right? It's understanding, it's taking the temperature of the patient, understanding where they are, where where you are in your journey, and then putting together a roadmap, right? I mean, what is it that we need to do? I know your SPRS score was whatever it was, right? But now the reality is, how do we get you ready so when A-LIGN comes in to do your audit, you're in a good position to be certified. So and then from that plan, there's going to be a few things. One of them is what are the configuration changes, the systems that need to be set up, and the engineering aspects of the compliant configuration management, and then the documentation that supplements those processes, such as the SSP with the boundary documentation and the data flow, as well as all the policies and procedures. That's a lot, right? I mean, drafting all that documentation and making sure that both the configuration, the setup of the environment, as well as the documentation match is a big task. And I think that's where we accelerate that process very quickly as a service provider. Cost effective, I mean, like most, a lot of organizations try to post a job rec for a GRC person, compliance person, and that just takes time, right? So we're able to come in on board quickly, ready to impact. Our consultants are seeing this in and out, companies like yours. They have gone through audits already, not only on the CMMC side, but also from DeepCAC. We have seen what the auditors are looking for. We're also looking into, how the environment can be, reduced and the scope reduced. Also, how the business is not impacted. So there's a lot of things a lot of synergies just by the fact that the consultants are doing this. This is their main job. This is what they do every day, and this is what they do with multiple clients. That's a big component to that. Jeannie, let me pass it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, so wrapping it up here, what should you do next if you're a contractor or subcontractor in the defense industrial base? So it goes back to what Rolando just said. So perform a gap analysis against NIST 800-171 Rev 2. So that is what the assessors are going to be looking at. All of the assessment objectives as well. So there's 320 assessment objectives and 110 controls, equaling 430 controls in total that you will have to take a look at. Add all of that to your gap analysis. This way you're not missing any of the assessment objectives when you go into an assessment. Document all of that control health in your SSP. Maintain that as well. Develop your policies and procedures to go along with that. Maintain a robust incident response plan. This way you can be in adherence with DFAR 7012 reporting requirements as well. Update any of your contracts with your subcontracts to include any of the mandatory CY flow down provisions. So take a look at your contracts that we talked about earlier when we talked about contracts. If you have flow down requirements and you're a contractor or subcontractor, make sure that your flow down requirements are going down to your subcontractors too. And then train your employees on CY protection as well. Stay informed about the finalized ruling for the FAR CY rule. That will be published by approximately March 15th. And then engage during the comment period. The public comment period is still open right now for the official CY ruling. March 17th. And again, bottom line here, achieving FAR CY compliance is not optional, right? So prepare now to secure your federal contracts and then build trust in the supply chain. And I'll pass it back to you, Matt.
Great. Thank you, Jeannie. So we've got about 10 minutes left here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, we really mapped out, hey, what is CMMC? What all do you need to consider in terms of getting compliant? Once you're compliant, we didn't talk about the levels much, but I did see a question we're going to touch on about levels 1, 2, and 3. If you are level 2, you do need a CMMC certification. You need a C3PAO, that's a CMMC third-party assessment organization like A-LIGN, to come in and assess you and issue that certification. We are the actual certification body. So when and how do I select a C3PAO? What do I need to be thinking about with those? We're going to talk a little bit about that here, and then I'm going to try to move relatively quickly through this so that we can answer some of the questions that I see in the chat. So one thing I want to highlight, selecting a C3PAO is a very vital step, the CMMC kind of compliance and assessment process. It's obviously going to impact your experience, your final report, but then also timing can be and is very critical. So I've got a lot that I can and probably will say on that. I've broken this into 4 main categories that I'd like to touch on. The first being the expertise. Obviously, when you're considering a C3PAO, you want to consider like what is their expertise in this space. While the one thing I wanted to highlight here, while CMMC certifications are new, the frameworks, NIST 171 specifically, that they pull from for the controls is not new. So, ask around if you're talking to different C3PAOs, some questions to ask would be, what's your experience with these NIST frameworks? I'd say prior to CMMC, because the assessments only began in January of this year. So a little over a month, about 5 to 6 weeks of assessments have been happening. What is your experience prior to that with NIST-based frameworks, whether that's NIST 171, FedRAMP, FSMA audits, 853 baselines, whatever it may be? Obviously, you want to make sure that they have experience with that. You're not kind of learning with them in terms of how they need to assess these different frameworks. So I broke that into expertise. Next one, experience. What I meant by this is, what is your experience? Think about what experience you want as the organization seeking certification as you go through the assessment process. Nobody likes getting audited. They're inherently not fun. We're checking you. We're seeing if you're meeting certain controls or not through review of documentation, policies and procedures, interviewing personnel. What experience are you going to get, and what are you looking for there in terms of the quality, the efficiency, and also, this will play into the timing a little bit, but how long do each of those phases take? And have they kind of mapped out for me what this is going to look like in some initial discussions? What is their process in terms of coordination and time to get back to me if and whenever I have questions? All of these sorts of things I think are really important and often underestimated. So think about what would be important to you in terms of questions you would want to ask the C3PAO in terms of what would I want this actual audit experience to look like? Timing. So there's a lot we could touch on here. One thing I noted, when are you looking to achieve your CMMC level 2 certification? A lot of organizations are coming to me and asking me that question. When do I need my level 2 CMMC certification? So a lot of them don't know, but some of them do. There's nuance to that answer, and it depends a little bit on your specific situation, what requirements you might already have, what you foresee, where you're at in the supply chain. For instance, a lot of subcontractors that we talk to now, I'm hearing them say, hey, my prime contractor is already coming to me and telling me I need to get CMMC certified by X date, or I need to show proof that I'm on a C3PAO schedule by Y date, whatever that might be, right? It might be a little bit organization specific, because the actual DoD contract requirements for CMMC as a program to require level 2 certifications pre-award is not here today, right? That's coming in the future. So what everybody's doing right now is saying, well, let's get certified now so that pre-award, once that does show up on my contract requirements, it's not too late, right? One thing I want to highlight is if you wait until this shows up in your contract requirements, it will be too late to meet that contract, right? You need the time that Jeannie and Rolando talked about for implementation and getting ready. You also need the time to get on a C3PAO schedule and actually get assessed and certified. The other thing I want to talk about with timing really quickly is there are a ton of organizations that are going to need and that do need level 2 certifications. There is a ton of interest that these C3PAOs are hearing about. There are not a ton of C3PAOs, that is organizations that can issue these certifications today. So there is a backlog that I would say continues to build. So if this is something that you want to prioritize and say, I don't want to run any risk of potentially getting left behind on these contract requirements, I would highly recommend engaging and talking to a C3PAO earlier in the process than you might be thinking you would right now, because as long as you can talk about and scope this out, and if you need help figuring any of that out, I'm happy to hop on a call and talk through that. As long as we could scope it out, I would highly recommend getting on their calendar, getting under contract with whoever you want to work with there as early in the process as possible, because the backlogs are just going to continue to build. The last thing you'd want to do is say, hey, I'll talk to a C3PAO once I'm compliant, and then summer, fall, winter of this year comes around, you reach out to them and C3PAOs are saying, oh, we're looking 9 months out, a year out, whatever it might look like at that point. And I'm already hearing from other C3PAOs that there is a backlog in the realm of like 6 to 9 months. Our backlog is a little bit more favorable. We can talk through that in more detail, but that is something important to consider. Last thing I want to touch on, obviously budget, very important topic. Everybody loves budget. So is this assessment budgeted for currently? I'm talking to a ton of organizations that had not budgeted for this previously. It is a new certification. Maybe you're just now finding out about it. Maybe you're just now figuring out what it might cost. We can help with any of those estimates if and when that's important. But one thing that I do want to highlight is there's obviously a trade-off between budget and the other factors that are important to you. You want to make sure you're considering all of the factors. You certainly don't want to go with the lowest budget and then you're missing out on all of those other factors that are important, and then it takes longer, it's a cumbersome process, maybe it didn't go how you wanted, whatever that might be. But then the inverse is true as well. You don't want to necessarily pay the most and then maybe you feel like you didn't get some of those other factors that are important to you. So it's all about balancing and finding what that right mix is for you and the trade-off that you might get. Okay, I want to leave a few minutes here. I wanted to work through that really quickly. I see we just have about 4 minutes left. I don't want to eat up anybody's time beyond that, but I do see we have some fantastic questions. I'll see how many we can get to here. So Jeannie, Rolando, I'll throw some over to you. Let's see if we can answer these as succinctly as possible to hit on as many as we can. And the first one I think should be relatively straightforward. I'm just going to go in a sequential order here. So we didn't talk a lot about the levels. So CMMC is a program. There's level 1, level 2, and level 3. This question comes in and says, how do I know if my organization qualifies for a level 1 self-assessment versus a requirement to have a level 2 external assessment? Rolando or Jeannie, do you want to take that really quickly?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeannie.
Yeah, I can take that. So it would be stipulated in your contract. If it's not stipulated in your contract, I would suggest you reach out to your cognizant security agency. If you don't have a contract and you're going to bid on a contract, take a look at the type of sensitive data you have within your environment. So you can go to the CUI archives and it will give you a listing in the NARA registry of all sensitive type of data that qualifies as controlled and classified information. You can start there. If you have any sensitive type of data that is considered controlled and classified information, then yes, you would need a level 2 external self-assessment like Matt referenced earlier. One caveat I wanted to talk about with mention Matt, to add on to what you said earlier, there are 2 different ways that you can get level 2 certification. You can still do a level 2 self-assessment, and then there will be a requirement for the C3PAO for level 2. That will be listed in your contract as well. But again, it's like what Matt said earlier, it's coming in contracts. It's not codified yet, but according to the DoD CIO website, there is that stipulation that it's either going to be a self-assessment or the need for the C3PAO.
Thank you, Jeannie. Yeah, one thing I do get a lot of questions around, hey, how do I know if it'll be a self-assessment or not? Again, that will be coming. But if you look at the DoD estimates, it is a vast minority. So a majority of the organizations that will fall into level 2, again, based on the DoD numbers and estimates that they've put out, will fall into a requirement to have a C3PAO come in and do an external assessment. Okay, another question here. I believe it was Rolando, so I'll throw this question to you, who mentioned something about remote scope early on. There was a question from Ken. Can you clarify what you mean by remote? Do we need to address employees that work 100% remote? I'll tee it up. I know that it's going to be the consultant answer of it depends. Can you touch a little bit on what does that depend on?
Yeah, so I think there's the technical answer to that, which will be challenged by the solution that you decide to use. But if CUI is processed by the CPU or in the memory or storage of the endpoint, right, the device, the laptop that the remote person is using, that device will be in scope.
And we can send over some further information, kind of further clarifying. And Ken, if you want to hop on a call, I'm sure either team would be happy to talk through that more. I might just take one more question here. I know that we can go over by a minute, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I'll take one more question, and then we'll make sure that we answer all the other ones via email. So last question here. What's more common, generally speaking, setting up an enclave versus relying on enterprise-wide controls/compliance?
I think, it really depends, right? Like the numbers might skew the scenario specific for each company, right? But I would say enterprise-wide is hard, right? Especially if you have legacy systems that don't support the level of encryption that is required by the DoD. So even if it's a subset of the enterprise-wide systems, you're gonna gain a lot of acceleration on the process, right? If you exclude certain systems. But I would say in general, what we see is most companies are trying to not necessarily build an enclave. Maybe that's part of it, but at least reduce the scope as much as they can within the business workflows that they have to support.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Well, I want to wrap up here. We're a minute over. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. First of all, thank you all so much for joining us. Rolando, do you want to give a quick overview on Abaco, just really quickly to close this out and what you guys do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, we are a cybersecurity and compliance firm. We're an MSSP, managed security service provider, that differentiated itself, by providing compliance services. And, we're able to take organizations like yours from, the uncertainty of whether or not they're CMMC compliant or what they need to do to be CMMC compliant, all the way to, being ready for the audit, provide audit liaison services to support you through the audit process, which in itself could be disruptive, and then keep and maintain the compliance throughout the years as you continue in your journey. That's what we do. That's the only thing that we do, and we look forward to having conversation with some of you with regards to our ability to help you with your CMMC journey.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And on our end, kind of touched on this a little bit, but just a quick overview, A-LIGN, how we might be able to assist here. So we're a leading provider of high quality cybersecurity compliance and assessments. So again, with CMMC, we are a C3PAO. We want to be that independent third-party audit body that would issue your level 2 certification. We're a top player in the federal space. So if you want to learn more, reach out. You can visit align.com. You can reach out to us directly. We'll send some information. And I just want to, again, thank you all so much for joining us on this webinar today. We hope it was helpful. We'll follow up with any questions that we didn't get to answer. And hopefully we talk to you all again soon. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.